Emails reveal those jagged rocks were installed on Imperial Avenue to shoo the homeless away from Petco Park for next month's All-Star game. Poway puts its superintendent on leave after some questionable and expensive decisions. And more fireworks are expected as a scaled-down version of the controversial One Paseo development in Carmel Valley goes back before City Council on Monday. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are freelance journalist Kelly Davis. Hi, Kelly.
Hey, Mark.
Good to see you here today. Reporter Ashley McGlone of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Ashley.
Hi there.
And David Garrick, who covers City Hall for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Mark.
Good to have you back today. Well, in April, the city of San Diego installed jagged rocks on both sides of the Imperial Avenue I-5 underpass. City officials said Sherman Heights residents had expressed concern about homeless people camping under the freeway there. So the rocks were put there to keep them from setting up their tents. But it turns out people living nearby had really nothing to do with the city's action. So, Kelly, what was that reason? I mean, it was an official statement here. It was these massive complaints we supposedly heard from the Sherman Heights folks.
Yeah, so back in late April, a Facebook page called Homelessness News San Diego, which is run by a guy named Michael McConnell. He's a real advocate, very outspoken on homelessness issues. And he posted photos of these kind of pallets of these very jagged, the first time I saw them, I described them as violent looking kind of sand colored, neutral colored rocks that were being installed under along Imperial Avenue under the I-5. And so I sent an email to a city spokesperson who handles public works, and I said, what's this about? What's going on here? And his response at the time was, the new landscaping is meant to address safety concerns raised by neighborhood residents in Sherman Heights who use Imperial Avenue as their main connection to downtown. So basically, the residents asked for this, and there was a lot of backlash. This story got picked up. The Union Tribune wrote an editorial kind of condemning these rocks. The council member who represents District 8, which includes Sherman Heights, he's like, we had nothing to do with this. So it was that this was at the request of Sherman Heights residents.
Oh, okay, we do have a bite here. KPBS photojournalist Katie Skuloff, she talked to Richard Stevenson, a homeless man who says he fell on the rocks. Here's what he had to say.
Oh man, these rocks are sharp. You see how the edges of these rocks is? Man, I got bruises here, bruises there. These is pointy. This is sharp. All this stuff here is sharp. They put everybody's life in danger, you know what I mean? If a disabled person come down here and fall and hit their head on there, they in trouble, you know what I mean? It's a whole bunch of BS, you know what I mean? They did all this so they could stop people from sleeping here, but it really didn't do nothing. It just had people still sleeping, you know, right here on the sidewalk, so it really didn't do nothing.
So as Katie Schuloff got in that interview from that fellow, there's no way you sit on this. This isn't a comfortable thing. Is it like riprap, what we see out at the at the ocean?
Exactly. Yeah, jetty rocks were the inspiration. Well,
yeah, which is not comfortable as anybody's tried to go out there and lounge around. All right. So how did you learn what the real motivation was behind this rock project if it wasn't these complaints from the Sherman Heights folks?
So I put in a public records request just to see what was behind this, what was the inspiration, did they do studies, who did they consult? And it took them about 2 months to respond to my request. And
what did they respond with? Internal communications?
Hundreds of pages of emails saying, and in these emails there is no mention of Sherman Heights residents asking for this. This was solely driven by a man named John Casey, who was he worked for the city, but he was the city's liaison with the Padres. Okay. So in these emails, he's saying he's kind of the point person to pick out the rocks. And initially, the plans were to put rocks near the public library, near Petco Park, Tailgate Park, the big parking lot next to Petco. And the timeline they were working with was the All-Star game. Let's get this all done by the All-Star game.
And it's coming July 12th, of course, and the All-Star game, as we all know, is a huge event, brings national cameras, national press, big focus and spotlight on San Diego. The idea is to kind of showcase San Diego, and we don't want those nasty homeless folks down there in the camera shot.
Yeah, and one thing that keeps showing up in these emails from John Casey is he wanted Imperial Avenue to be the gateway to East Village. So, you know, you look down Imperial and that's the straight shot to Petco, and he envisioned it being cleared out of these homeless folks in this kind of rock garden, you know, lining the side.
And what was the cost of this project, this rock project?
$57,000, I believe. Okay. Yeah.
All right, and McConnell, the homeless advocate, what had he said all along was the motivation? Was he kind of calling this as it was way back when?
Yeah, so he lives in East Village, and he's out there a lot with his camera, filming, you know, these kind of police sweeps where they go and they clear out encampments. And so he sees this as part of a larger effort to push the homeless folks out of East Village, out of downtown.
All right. We do have another bite. Katie Shulove talked with another Sherman Heights resident, David Carpenter. Let's see what he had to say.
We're on Imperial, right up from Father Joe's underneath the bridge. And it was a place where the homeless of San Diego would get out of the rain and would sleep, and then they would pack their tents up in the afternoon. But it's just pushing people closer to our homes who have homes on 25th. I live at 25th and Commercial, and most of those neighborhoods have alleys in between the back, and we are just having a lot more homeless people sleeping in the alleys behind our homes. And it's dangerous. People have hurt themselves on the rocks.
All right, so that's kind of an irony, as he points out, because it's the Sherman Heights complaint, supposedly, but actually they're going deeper into that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went down to take some photos of the underpass and noticed encampments setting up. It was getting towards evening, and encampments were setting up just about 2 blocks in the Sherman Heights
east
direction.
of where it had been.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about the city leaders on this? Mayor Kevin Faulkner's office. The mayor said anything about this?
I could find no evidence in the emails that this was led by the mayor's office. The mayor's office said it had nothing to do with it. This was. And the Padres also claimed that they had nothing to do with it. This was just kind of a rogue employee. I don't know if you want to believe that, but
David?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's amazing if you look at the timing, big picture. I mean, this is the first time San Diego's going to host the All-Star game, I think 30 years, something like that. First time at Petco Park, and then the homeless population in San Diego, for a wide variety of factors, is higher than maybe ever before, but certainly much higher than it was even a year ago. So it's just sort of bad luck, and I'm not saying their reaction is appropriate, but I could see how they'd be frustrated. They choose to have it here finally, and then homelessness skyrockets right in the vicinity of Petco Park.
Right.
And you know, when the Super Bowl was in San Francisco this past January, the mayor there was blatant. Like, he was in the media saying, we homeless folks were creating this area around the stadium. Please move out for the duration of the festivities. So he was upfront and honest about what the city was doing. So here we're not seeing that, and the mayor's office is saying, oh, no, we have nothing to do with this. You know, that there's nothing wrong with just explaining, we've got a lot of national cameras, we've got media, we've got extra people going to walk around downtown, so, you know, clear out. Or
Now, City Beat also had a story this week about a pastor who feeds the homeless on the street a few times a week here, and he's being threatened by a police official at a meeting to stop doing that. In other words, you know, getting these folks out here and encouraging them. That's going on as well, huh?
Apparently, groups, church groups that do street feedings have been asked during the All-Star game to cease doing that, or to partner up with like Father Joe's or Path, you know, another big homeless facility, and help them provide food during that time.
And we should say before moving on that Councilman David Alvarez, his area, Councilman Todd Gloria, adjacent district, they're pretty upset about this, and they weren't in favor of it.
Yeah, they say they weren't consulted about it. Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll see how this works as we get closer to this big event coming in next month. Well, we're going to move on. The reputation for excellence long enjoyed by Poway schools has been jolted by a series of recent scandals. The highly paid superintendent has been placed on paid leave, and now an interim replacement has been hired to calm the waters. Ashley, start with some background here. What got Superintendent John Collins in hot water to begin with?
So what we know is he's been on paid leave about 2 months now. They said they put him on leave so that they can conduct an audit of his employment contract. By extension, in my mind, that has to include his compensation. We know he has a $300,000 base salary in his contract. His total compensation package, though, is somewhere around $500,000. That includes some longevity pay, stipends, and then these Me Too raises, which kick in when he achieves negotiations with his employees to give them raises. He automatically gets them, which has raised some concerns about
self-dealing. Yeah, and we're going to get to that in a minute here. It's one of the questions there, too. So who stepped in now this week to kind of be there in the interim?
So they've chosen Edward Velasquez, who's currently finishing up an interim job out in Alpine Union School District. Last year, San Ysidro School District tapped him to help them in a budget crisis. So he's been praised for helping bring them out of that slump. And so he'll be taking the job in Poway August 1st.
Okay, kind of a fixer brought in who's done this sort of thing before.
Right.
So this whole thing got into the news, even national news, regarding the Poway schools with that capital appreciation bond. Tell us about that. That was originally going to provide $105 million for construction and improving physical things at the school district, right? And the cost of that got a little out of hand.
Right, yeah, school districts, Poway kind of put this financing mechanism on the map, but they...
Because they don't want to raise taxes.
Right. If you need money, but you don't have money and you want to keep school construction projects going, you could obtain bond money with promises to postpone payments for as much as 20 years, which is what Poway did. During that time, interest compounds and accrues, and so the debt balloons, and then you spend the last 20 years paying that off. And again, so Poway, $105 million becomes almost $1 billion, and that will be repaid by local taxpayers, and they hope by then assessed values will rise. But yeah, tax payments will jump based on whatever's needed to pay off that debt at that time.
And they're not the only ones doing this. San Ysidro, several other districts had done it, but the state has stepped in since then, right, and said, look, this is not a good practice for taxpayers.
Right. The extent to which Poway and even San Diego Unified and San Ysidro took the liberties that they did with the amounts of money they did this with prompted state legislators to completely change capital appreciation bonds. So no district can today do what was done in Poway. What they've done is they said capital appreciation bonds still exist, but they can no longer be longer than 25 years. And the principal, you can't pay more than 4 times the amount. So that's drastically reduced.
Yeah, you were talking 9 to 10 times. To put that in context, the average mortgage owner on a home, two and a half times over the length of say a 30-year mortgage that a lot of us might have. Right. All right. Now, what happened there was a kind of a double whammy there. There was Superintendent Collins. He had a consultant's report on the district's technology education program. What happened there?
So last year, the district hired a third-party consultant to independently assess their technology department. It cost $40,000, but the report was less than flattering, and it was pretty critical of the district and higher administration. So Collins took it upon himself to make some edits, to remove some of the harshest of criticism, to soften it a bit, and he didn't disclose his role in doing that. So it was presented as the consultant's report, and so folks felt that that wasn't entirely transparent or even ethical.
You're kind of calling it a whitewash then at that point. Okay, so he was placed on leave with the specifics of where they regarding that situation you just described with that report and all the problems with the bonds. It was a kind of accumulation of things.
You know, it's not totally clear. They haven't said much. Again, they've said, hey, we're looking at his contract. Again, that by extension means, I think, his compensation. There's also been concerns that he's maybe overstepped his bounds by initiating litigation against local residents without board approval, trying to get restraining orders and such, that most of them were not successful. But yeah, it kind of remains to be seen what exactly is being looked at. They claim July 11th, much will be known about what's going on.
I mean, typically when someone gets put on paid administrator, they never come back. Though I mean, I think it's safe to tell Poway people that he's not going to be back. And that would seem very unlikely. And they didn't hire their own attorneys as well.
They did. The board brought in their own independent counsel when things sort of took a turn for the worse, I think, in the fall. I think it's a serious step to put a superintendent on leave, and he's been on leave for 2 months. So this audit that's taking place, potentially they find something problematic and maybe find cause to fire him so they don't have to pay him his final year of his salary on his contract.
So to be clear, that's one more year after this one. It would be the coming school year would be the final year of that contract.
His contract, yeah.
Okay, and as we said, the interim here, the acting superintendent in this interim period here, that may buy everybody a little breathing space, enough time to have the old regime move out and his assistants move out and get somebody else in place.
Right. It just so happens I'm not sure if it's related or not, but a bunch of top-ranking officials are retiring or taking other jobs, and so I think there's something like 8 or 9 positions that need to be filled. They did choose a new assistant superintendent of HR on Wednesday, but they still need to fill the top business chief position, head of facilities, head of planning. So lots of turnover still to come in Poway.
Now, in your story, you brought up the Dolinka group here, Benjamin Dolinka's group in consulting and all, and they've been there for several years, and some people kind of point to them as some villains in this piece as well, right?
They were the financial advisors on the capital appreciation bond deal, so the district was taking their advice when they entered into that deal. But they've stuck around and pretty much controlled the district's Melrose special tax program as well. They got a 5-year contract in February 2014 with a not-to-exceed amount of $625,000.
That would be per year.
Well,
on the length of the contract.
Well, that's the dispute.
That was
yes.
the dispute. That's what you wrote about it.
Right. The board discovered that some members had inquired and realized that they've already been paid twice that $625,000 amount, $1.27 million, and we're just about halfway. And so the staff is saying, well, you approved an annual authorization. Really, that was a $3 million contract. All is good. And some board members aren't convinced, and they want an audit of those payments.
David?
Do you think that's incompetence or possible corruption? I mean, or a little both?
Maybe another audit will determine what the deal is.
So how would that work? They discuss this at the meeting. There's minutes or a recording. I mean, there's a record of what happened at that meeting, but
Right.
what happened in the meeting didn't get into the contract, and the gatekeepers of the board didn't go back and really read that contract before they approved it. They just relied on what they thought they heard at the meeting. Is that
right?
what
There was
the
a
story
contractual services report, and so it'll say the term of the contract, the consultant, and then the amount not to exceed. The district, I've asked, hey, has this interpretation that staff is providing, hey, it's an annual amount that they're approving regardless of the term. They haven't been able to provide another example where that's been the interpretation. It's usually always not to exceed means not to exceed, and if you need more money, you come back to the board, and that's not what happened in this case.
Okay.
So that makes it sound like the staff is maybe more at fault than the board, because the board is following normal protocol, and they believe what they read, and they can't maybe read every 400-page contract,
Right.
and the staff maybe gave them bad direction.
Right, and the contract itself actually has no dollar cap on it, but this report that the board approved that is supposed to limit that, they had an understanding, and they're being
And
told
implied that it
was
did
wrong.
have a cap.
Yeah, I was wondering, is that unusual for the contract not to have that written in it? Like,
I think with financial consultants, maybe it's a little bit more normal, but typically you would see that amount spelled out in the contract.
All right, well, we'll see how this all plays out through the summer and look forward to more stories on this as we move on to the school year. One Paseo is getting a second chance. Kilroy Realty adopted the attitude of you can't beat them, join them, so the developer downsized the project significantly. But there's enough opposition to force the City Council to move the final showdown on Monday from City Hall to the larger adjacent Golden Hall. David, start by reminding us here, how big was One Paseo? This was kind of a monster development there in North City.
Yeah, it was. Well, and the key was it was at 1.45 million square feet, which is maybe almost the size of like Fashion Valley Mall or UTC. I mean, a little smaller, but in the same vicinity.
Big development.
And on a 24-acre plot, which is really, really smaller than you would typically see that on. It's been in the pipeline for 6-7 years, and when it was first proposed, the idea was this is the future of San Diego. This is smart growth. This is something that's near freeways. They claim it's near a coaster station, and so it's going to be an intense development. But this is what we're going to need, as we need more housing as the area continues to grow.
All right, when you say smart growth, that means we'll get people there in transit. It won't have so much impact on traffic, but traffic was the big concern.
Right, but instead of like Poway and areas that would be described as sprawl, the idea is you're going to build on existing transit corridors so that you're not going to increase pollution and all the other problems that come with suburban-style growth.
Now, how did members of the community originally manage to block, that is, the developer's initial big plan that you're describing?
Well, they've been opposing it all along, but the City Council approved it 7-2 back in February of 2015, and then they did a referendum campaign, which are becoming ever more popular in San Diego. It's minimum wage and barrio local. There's been a lot.
Gathering signatures is a full-time job for people.
Well, one thing to point out is San Diego has a lower threshold for referendums than a lot of other cities, so it's not as hard to get the required signatures to get that.
Get something on the ballot.
Right, exactly, 5% of registered voters. So they managed to successfully do that, and of course a lot of polls had shown that One Paseo was not very popular because it's so intense. And the reason I think this issue's caught fire is a lot of people across the city worried the same thing had happened in their neighborhood. If you live in Allied Gardens or North Park, you think, there could be a One Paseo in my neighborhood someday. So people have taken a lot of interest, and polls showed a lot of opposition to it. So the developer, facing the referendum and knowing that it was unlikely to succeed, they went back to the opponents who did the referendum.
Said, all right, let's work it out.
So this could be a great success story for the city. And it's, you know, people call it ballot box planning or referendum style planning. Maybe the city council should take the lead. But on the other hand, it looks like we're going to get a result that is more reasonable.
All right, well, let's talk about that. What is the scale down thing? Kind of give us the high points there of what's going on.
Well, it's only actually 20% smaller overall, but that's because the housing stays the same, 608 condos or apartments, right? But the key is the retail and the office is going to go way down, and those are the things that generate a lot more traffic.
Okay.
I mean, you live in your apartment, you come back and forth there. A retail, a restaurant, and a movie theater can generate an enormous amount of traffic.
Okay, so that's the big impact, and that satisfied a lot of the concern.
44% less traffic, which the residents was their big concern.
Yeah.
Another concern they had was sort of the bulk and scale, which is a term people use for the visual impact. And this is an empty piece of property off Delmar Heights Road, you know, where Karma Valley is, just off Delmar there.
Right.
And it's like, this is completely empty. And all of a sudden it was going to have 1.45 million square feet.
Yeah.
And now
throwing
it's
a small village into the middle of this.
Exactly. And it's going to have a lot less, but also there's going to be setbacks where even though it'll be large, it'll be off the road enough where it won't like smack you in the face. At least that's what they're saying.
Okay. Now, what sort of things did Kilroy, the developer, do to kind of work with the community, the not beat 'em, join 'em aspect?
Well, they held a lot more focus groups. They held meetings. They hired a new architect. You know, they're pretty savvy, and they realized, I think, you know, we're not going to get what we once thought. We've got to accept, I guess you call it defeat or compromise, and work with it. But one thing I think that's ironic, based on what you said, is that the residents there really did want a main street, a downtown. Carmel Valley kind of lacks that. So in a way, they were excited about this when it first came up. The problem is that the developer, in their opinion, got carried away. And so maybe this is a little closer to what they wanted.
Now, we should explain, for people who don't know, there's community planning groups. These are folks who take it upon themselves to be knowledgeable about the community, and they're representing what people want to see and excitement about developments or not. And they're still split on this one, the Carmel Valley group.
They vehemently opposed it, but before the council approved it in 2015. So you could argue, I mean, progress is always in the eye of the beholder. But a 5-5 deadlock, you could be considered progress based on the fact that I think it was 11-1 or something.
They were really against it before.
Yeah. So they're a little bit less against it, but they're still. Again, that's a situation too where it is very intense. It looks smaller now in relative terms to what was before. It's still quite intense for a suburban. Carmel Valley is not Little Italy. I mean, it's a very suburban area with a lot of one-story, construction, and so it's unusual to see something this intense there.
Ashley?
Is it still going to be considered or be the draw as a town center in the scaled-back version, you think?
I think it's going to be town center light. I mean, the office buildings and the retail in particular. See, the retail, I think the residents wanted more restaurants in the retail component, but that was also the most traffic. The housing is staying the same, so I think if the residents had their druthers, they would have gotten rid of the housing completely, maybe, and done all retail, but then all of a sudden you've got the traffic. So there was no real way to please everyone all the time.
Kelly?
Is there any real organized opposition this time around? I've heard a lot of the opponents have come over to the other side. And
a lot of them come over voluntarily, but kind of an odd thing that I've never covered before is that part of the agreement to settle a lawsuit, in addition to the referendum, a lot of the opponents threw up a lawsuit regarding the environmental impact report. And part of the settlement of that was that they had to agree to not oppose this aggressively. So the developer said, okay, I don't know if people quietly in their living rooms are still swearing about One Paseo, but the most vocal folks from before are sort of not allowed to say anything. So we'll see.
All right. Is this still going to be considered an example of smart growth as the city likes to define it?
It's hard. That's a vague term. I would say it's certainly less a good example. And some even questioned before. Smart growth would typically be nearer to transit. They've got a shuttle they're going to run to the Solana Beach coaster station. So this was always debatably smart growth, and I think you would argue now maybe it's less. On the other hand, you do have office towers, housing, and retail together. So theoretically, someone could manage one of the retail stores and live in an apartment, or work in one of the office towers and live in an apartment. It's near a freeway. So if you're generous, I think it's still smart growth.
Now, if you commuted or you work downtown, you could still get there by public transit and take that shuttle?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's
it's close.
Yeah, so that's the idea. It's close.
Right.
Okay.
It's not like a high-rise in Little Italy, which is a block from the trolley.
Yeah. Okay. Now let's talk about the council. Originally, you said they did okay the plan. You think they will again this time around?
If they approve the gigantic one 7-2, it's hard to convince yourself that they're going to vote against a smaller scale back one. You never know, but it seems unlikely.
Yeah. Now, but they must be putting the feelers out there, and the staff must be asking questions because they moved it from City Hall, which can hold quite a. We've all seen some fireworks down there and watched some of these angry protests over all sorts of controversial issues. But Golden Hall's a lot bigger place, so they're going to get some people down there.
Right? Yeah. Or they're paranoid. But I think Sherry Leitner's office. It's in her district,
Right.
and she spends a lot of time. I think she must be getting enough emails and phone calls about it that she felt it was warranted to make the venue change.
Okay. Now, if it does get approved, kind of walk us through the timetable on that. When would we see some construction, and maybe would people moving in and all that kind of
I
stuff?
mean, I think it would be 2 years before people would move in probably, but they would get their entitlements quickly, and they've been preparing for this for a long time, so I would think you'd see construction start relatively quickly. I don't know, but I would say 6 months to a year.
Okay. And as you say, it still is a very big project, so it's going to take a while to build out. Well, can we safely say then this was ugly democracy, but in the end it kind of looks like it might work? Huh?
Yes, I think you're probably right.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see, and I'm sure you'll be covering that on Monday, and we'll take a look, and then a lot of developers around the county will be watching this as maybe a model for what happens now.
Everyone has been watching this for a while, and I think it was a defeat for the development community, but maybe now they get sort of a tie.
And here's how we work, and listen to the people. There's a message for all of us. All right, we're out of time. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, freelance journalists Kelly Davis, Ashley McGlone of Voice of San Diego, and David Garrick of the San Diego Union Tribune. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.